This is Lenny Farlee, Purdue University Extension Forester. Now let's ID that tree. In this edition of ID That Tree, we're going to provide some identification clues to yet another species of oak found here in Indiana. Obviously a very diverse group, and sometimes a difficult one to do good identification on. And this species is Shumard oak. Shumard oak is more typically found on bottomland sites or moist soil areas, as opposed to where some of our other oaks will be encountered, which is more dry uplands. Shumard oak can look like a lot of the other red oak family, and in fact northern red oak can pretty easily be confused with Shumard oak, but we'll give you some identification clues to help separate those two. As in all our oaks, Shumard oak has alternate leaf arrangement and simple leaves. It has relatively light colored twigs, oftentimes this tan to almost straw color. And that will be one of the characteristics you can use to separate it from northern red oak, which typically have pretty dark brown to reddish brown twigs. Buds otherwise can be relatively similar. And as is the case with the oaks, we oftentimes will have what we call terminal bud clusters, several buds clustered toward the end of the twig, and also some leaves clustered there as well. The leaves on Shumard oak are actually quite attractive, can be quite large, highly divided, deep lobes with sinuses in between the lobes. And one characteristic is oftentimes multiple little bristle tips on the ends of the lobes. If we compare that to northern red oak, we'll see that the divisions between the lobes are not as deep oftentimes, and many times not as highly divided on the ends of the lobes. So that may be somewhat of a useful characteristic, but leaves tend to be very variable. Another good characteristic for identifying any of the oaks is to see if we can find an acorn. And so acorns do provide us some pretty good clues to identification in terms of their shape and size. And so the acorns on Shumard oak tend to be quite large, very rounded, and a cap that will oftentimes cover about a third of the acorn in kind of a broad dish. If we compare that to red oak, northern red oak, the acorn is very similar in size, but the cap tends to be much more flattened and covering maybe a quarter of the acorn itself, looking like a little beret on top of the acorn. Bark can also provide us some clues on older trees. The bark on Shumard oak has a tendency to be relatively smooth as compared to northern red oak, so not as heavy ridging. And if you remember, northern red oak will have a tendency to have ski tracks, light silvery lines running up the stem. Shumard oak has a tendency to be much flatter and more uniformly silvery in color. So Shumard oak, one of our many native Indiana red oak species.